Welcome to Revenge with Arya. You know your brother just closed on his second property, my dad said, refilling his glass like he was reading the weather forecast. By your age, he had already built something real. I set my fork down, slowly. The way you do when you're deciding whether to swallow one more thing or finally let it out. By my age, I said. I'd already bought mine. You just never asked. The table went quiet. My mom looked up from her plate. My brother's wife stopped chewing. And my dad, the man who had given exactly one toast in the last 3 years, all of it about my brother, blinked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What are you talking about? My mom asked. The condo, I said, on Delwood. I closed 14 months ago. Nobody said anything, and in that silence, I finally understood something I'd been circling for years. They hadn't forgotten. They just never thought to ask. My name is Ren. I'm 31. And if you think this story is about a house, stay with me. Because the house was never really the point. Growing up, my brother Theo was the kind of kid adults wrote letters of recommendation for without being asked. Varsity captain. Dean's List. The son my parents introduced at parties by listing his accomplishments before his name. I was introduced as, and this is our daughter. Full stop. I didn't resent him for it. I want to be clear about that. Theo didn't build that dynamic. My parents did. He just lived inside it comfortably. The way people live inside houses they didn't build but never question either. I was 2 years younger, quieter in the ways that got labeled as difficult. I asked too many questions. I pushed back. I didn't follow the path they'd paved, which was state school, accounting or nursing, marry someone respectable, live within 20 minutes of them forever. Instead, I moved to Chicago at 22 with $4,000 and a graphic design portfolio that my mom called a hobby phase. I freelanced, then got hired, then got promoted, then started taking on clients of my own. By 29, I was making more than I'd ever told my parents because the one time I mentioned a raise, my mom had pivoted immediately to asking if Theo needed help with his mortgage. I stopped sharing things after that. Not out of anger, at first. Just self-preservation. Like covering a plant that keeps getting frost. I met my husband James at a work event 3 years ago. He was a structural engineer presenting at a conference I was designing materials for. He laughed at something I said that wasn't meant to be a joke, and then apologized for it with such genuine mortification that I knew I was in trouble. We dated for 8 months before I introduced him to my family. I kept waiting for the right moment, which really meant I kept waiting to feel safe enough. I knew what would happen. My mom would ask where he went to school. My dad would ask about his 5-year plan. Theo would be held up as the benchmark without anyone saying it directly. I was right about all of it. Dinner lasted 3 hours. James held my hand under the table the whole time, and afterward in the parking lot, said, "They love you. They just don't know how to show it without ranking things." He wasn't wrong. He also wasn't entirely right. We got engaged on a Tuesday in March. He proposed in our kitchen while we were making pasta, flour on the counter, sauce on the stove. No audience, no Instagram moment. Just him, on one knee on our kitchen tile, holding a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, saying, "I don't want to do any of this without you." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married 4 months later in a courthouse ceremony with 12 people present. His parents, his sister, 4 friends, 2 of my closest friends from college, and a neighbor who had accidentally come to pick up a package, and we'd invited him on impulse. We had dinner afterward at a Lebanese restaurant we loved. Nobody cried. Everybody laughed. James fed me baklava across the table, and the whole thing felt exactly like us. I sent my parents a photo the next morning. Just one. Me in my dress, James in his suit, both of us grinning on the courthouse steps like we'd gotten away with something. No one responded. Not a text, not a call. For 11 days, nothing. Then my mom emailed. "We're hurt. We don't understand why you would do this. We could have had something beautiful for you." I read it twice. Then I thought about Theo's wedding the previous spring. The event my parents had spent 14 months and significant money constructing. The venue in Michigan. The band. The 3-tiered cake. The rehearsal dinner. My mother's speech, which had included a full chronological timeline of Theo's achievements from kindergarten to the moment he'd proposed. I had helped address the save the dates. I had driven 6 hours to be there. I had worn the dress my sister-in-law chose, which had a neckline that hit me wrong, and a shade of green that washed me out, and I had smiled in every photograph. I had danced. I had given a toast my mom had pre-screened. Nowhere in that wedding, not in the seating chart or the speeches or the family portrait taken at sunset, had anyone asked how I was doing. Whether I was seeing someone. Whether I was happy. So when I got engaged, I made a choice. Not out of spite. Out of protection. I didn't reply to the email. The dinner where I finally said it out loud happened 6 weeks ago. My parents have a standing Sunday dinner. My brother and his wife attend every week. I drove up once a month, sometimes less. That night they'd invited extended family too, aunts and cousins filtering in and out, the whole familiar choreography of a family performance. Theo had just finished explaining his second investment property. Everyone was nodding, impressed, attentive. My dad was doing that thing he does, where he asks follow-up questions as a way of showing pride. What's the vacancy rate in that market? Did you lock in a fixed rate? Then he turned to me, almost as an afterthought, and said, "You should look at something like that. Build equity. Your brother figured it out. It's not as complicated as people think. I am 31 years old. I have been paying a mortgage for over a year. I have a retirement account. I have clients who pay me more per project than my dad made in a month at my age. None of that was visible to him, because I had stopped performing it. But that night, something shifted. I have equity," I said. "In my condo. On Delwood. I bought it 14 months ago." He stared at me. "You bought a place?" I did. My mom set her glass down. "Why didn't you tell us?" And there it was. The question that should have come with shame, but instead just sat there, plain as furniture. "When would I have told you?" I asked. Not angry, genuinely curious. "You spent last Christmas talking about Theo's portfolio. Easter was about the renovation he was doing. Every call you give me is a life update about him. You haven't asked me a single direct question about my life in 2 years, so I stopped offering." The room had that particular quality of silence that happens when something true gets said at the wrong time. My aunt coughed. Someone refilled water. Theo was looking at the tablecloth. My dad said, "That's not fair." "Which part?" I asked. He didn't answer. The days after the dinner moved slowly. My mom called twice. I let both go to voicemail. The first message was short, "Call me back, please." The second was longer, and included the phrase, "You embarrassed your father in front of the family," which told me everything I needed to know about where her focus was. "My brother texted." I responded, "Okay." He never followed up. James was working late the night of the second voicemail. When he came home, I was sitting on the kitchen floor eating cereal, which is something I do when I'm processing things I haven't named yet. He sat down next to me without asking, poured himself a bowl, and said, "What's the word count?" It was a joke between us. He knows I overthink by volume. "Hi," I said. He nodded. "Want to talk or want company?" "Company." He stayed on the floor with me until I was ready. That's the thing about James that I couldn't have explained to my family if I tried. He doesn't need me to be legible to him. He doesn't need me performing okayness or achievement or anything. He just shows up in ways that are quiet and completely reliable. The kind of reliable you can only recognize once you've spent years around people who aren't. He knew my favorite flower before we'd been dating 3 months. Paper sites. He'd seen me stop on a walk once to look at them in someone's front yard, and he'd filed it away without saying anything. 2 weeks later, a small pot of them showed up on my desk at work, with a card that just said, "For the one who stops." My family never asked. In 3 years of knowing James, my mother's had asked about his job twice, and about his family once. She had never once asked what he was like, what he was good at, whether he made me laugh. He made me laugh every day. She didn't know that. It was my cousin who told me. She called on a Thursday, and I almost didn't answer. But she and I have always been outside the main narrative of the family. Two people who sat at the same table without quite belonging to the same story. "I need to tell you something," she said. And I'm telling you because I'd want to know. She'd been visiting my parents. My mom had shown her a framed photo from the last big family gathering, a birthday party for my dad. Everyone was in it. And in the space where I was standing in the actual photo, a different cousin had been inserted, cropped in, or maybe she'd moved, or maybe I'd been cropped out. Hard to tell from a phone photo of a frame. But my name on the little label at the bottom still read, Ren. Just not my face. I sat with that for a long moment. I wasn't surprised. That's the strange part. It didn't feel like a shock so much as a confirmation. The way you feel when a doctor names something you've been describing for years. They had replaced me. Not just emotionally, literally. In a frame on a wall, James was in the other room when I told him. He came in and stood in the doorway, and his jaw did that quiet tightening thing it does when he's choosing his words carefully. They replaced you in the photo, he said flatly. Apparently, with a label still saying your name. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very simply, do they know what your handwriting looks like? I looked at him. Because I do, he said. I know your handwriting. I know you write your sevens with a crossbar because you learned it from a French textbook in 7th grade. I know you underline things when you're excited and cross them out when you're angry. They put your name on a photo of someone else and don't know any of that. I didn't say anything. I just went to the desk and got a piece of paper and a marker. I wrote one word on the back of a postcard. Just one. Seen. I mailed it to my parents without explanation. No return address. Just that word. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. James asked me that evening if I felt okay. I thought about it honestly, the way I've learned to instead of reaching for the automatic I'm fine. I feel light, I said. Which is strange. It's not strange, he said, and I believed him. 3 weeks after the postcard, my dad called. Not a voicemail, a real call, at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, which meant he'd thought about it overnight and still wanted to do it. My dad is not a morning person, I answered. Can we meet? He said. Just you and me. I said I'd think about it. He said okay. He didn't push, which surprised me. I called him back 2 days later and said yes. We met at a diner, the old kind, counter and booths, pie under glass domes. He was there before me, which also surprised me. My dad is chronically late. He had coffee and was looking at the door when I walked in. He looked older than I remembered from the Sunday dinner. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently. He didn't start with an apology. He started with, I didn't know you bought a place. I know, I said. I should have asked. He wrapped both hands around his mug. I should have asked a lot of things. I waited. It's not an excuse, he said slowly, but your brother. He asks for things. He calls to tell us things. You went quiet and I thought that meant you were okay. I went quiet, I said carefully, because every time I tried to share something, it became a comparison. Or a segue into talking about him. So I stopped trying. He nodded. Not the nod of someone disagreeing politely. The nod of someone absorbing something they probably already knew but hadn't let themselves land on. The photo, he said. Yes. I didn't know about the photo. He looked up. I want you to know that. Your mother, she said some of the prints redone after the party, something about the lighting, and I didn't see the frame until it was on the wall. I should have looked closer. I should have. He stopped. I'm sorry. About the photo. I looked at him across the laminate table. I thought about the version of him I used to love most. The one who sat with me in the car outside violin recitals and said, You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. I don't know when he stopped saying things like that. I'm not asking you to choose, I told him. I'm not asking you to love him less. I'm asking you to see me. Not my accomplishments, not my timeline. Just me, as a person who exists when she's not being compared to someone else. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He smoothed it on the table. It was a print of the courthouse photo I'd sent. Me and James, laughing on the steps. I kept it, he said. I printed it out and kept it. My throat did something unexpected. Your mom thought it was disrespectful, he added. I put it in my desk drawer. I looked at the photo. I remembered exactly how James had made me laugh 1 second before it was taken. He'd tripped on the bottom step and caught himself and looked at me with total theatrical outrage. The photographer caught me mid-law. It was the most natural photo of me I'd ever seen. I picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. "I didn't know how to reach you," my dad said quietly, not without her hearing everything. I folded the photo and put it in my bag. "Then stop whispering and start talking," I said, not unkindly. "I'm not far. I just stopped walking toward people who weren't moving." He nodded again, didn't argue, paid for the coffee, walked me to my car. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a beginning of something I wasn't sure how to name yet. My mom came to our apartment without calling. I saw her car from the window, parked across the street, engine off. She sat there for 20 minutes. I watched her from behind the curtain like I was observing weather. When she finally got out, she was wearing the cream blazer she reserves for what she calls serious conversations, which is how I knew she had rehearsed something. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "You made your father cry." "He seemed okay at the diner," I said, after. "At home." She crossed her arms. "You don't know what this has done to him." I waited. "I did what I could," she said. "I tried to make things special. The dinner, the parties. You made things special for him," I said. Not shouting, just clear. "Not for me. And the difference matters." She shook her head. "You always needed so much." "Acknowledgement," I said. "I needed acknowledgement. That's not a lot." She looked at me the way she looks at things she doesn't want to take in. Like when she drives past neighborhoods that have changed and keeps her eyes slightly forward. "You replaced me in a photo," I said. "You still have my name on it. You framed it and put it on the wall. What am I supposed to do with that?" She didn't answer. "I'm not asking you to be different people," I said. "I'm telling you that I love you and I have limits. And I've been at my limit for a while now. I didn't disappear because I stopped caring. I disappeared because I got tired of being invisible." Her lip pressed together. I knew that expression. It was the one she wore when she was winning or losing and couldn't tell which. "You think you're so different from us," she finally. "I am different," I said. "That was always the problem for you. But it isn't a problem for me anymore." She left. No hug. Engine on, out of the space, tail lights. Same as always, different than before. I closed the door. Leaned against it for a moment. James appeared in the hallway with 2 mugs of tea, which meant he had heard everything and was making space for whatever I needed next. "She's gone," I said. "I know." He held out a mug. "You okay?" I took the tea. Getting there. The reframed photo arrived in the mail a week later. No note, just a bubble mailer. Inside, the original print of the birthday party. The real one, with me actually in it. No label. Just the photopico. I don't know who sent it. My dad. Probably. Maybe both of them together. Maybe it was the beginning of something, or maybe it was an attempt to close a chapter without opening the conversation. I didn't know yet, and I was learning to be okay with not knowing. I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. James noticed it that evening and didn't say anything, just touched it once lightly on his way to get water. That was enough. A month later, James and I hosted a dinner at our place. Nothing formal, folding chairs and borrowed table leaves and 4 different kinds of pasta because we couldn't agree on one. 12 people total. Friends, 2 of his cousins. My cousin who'd told me about the photo, a couple from our building we'd gotten close to during a shared parking dispute. At some point during the meal, James stood up without warning and said, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at him. He looked at me. "A little over a year ago," he said, "this person married me in a building that smelled like carpet cleaner with 12 witnesses and a neighbor named Carl." Carl, who was in fact present, raised his glass, and she has never once made me feel like I wasn't exactly where I was supposed to be. So, he lifted his glass. "To the person who shows up, every single time." I didn't cry. I laughed. Because that was exactly right. Afterward, my cousin leaned over and said, "Your parents are missing a lot." "They are," I said. And I meant it without bitterness, which was new. Not resignation, not suppression. Just truth with the ache taken out of it. I've stopped waiting for the call where everything gets resolved. The one where my mom says the exact right thing and my dad bridges every gap, and we all move forward recalibrated. That call might never come. And I'm working on being okay with that. Not as defeat, but as clarity. What I have is a husband who knows my handwriting. A home I bought without anyone's permission. Friends who showed up on a Tuesday with borrowed chairs. A cousin who told me the truth when she didn't have to. What I have is a life that fits me, built quietly, without audience. Last week, James and I were walking through the farmer's market near our place, and he stopped at a small plant stand and held up a pot of paper whites. Didn't say anything, just looked at me. I shook my head at him. You remember everything. Not everything, he said, just the things you say when you think nobody's listening. I bought 2 pots, put them on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. Every morning, they're the first thing I see when I'm standing there with my coffee, looking out at the street. They don't need much. Just light and a little water, and someone who remembers they're there. That's it. That's the whole thing. Some people mistake quiet for absence. They look past the one who doesn't announce herself, who doesn't hand them a highlight reel, who simply does the work and builds the life and shows up when it counts. They look right past her. And then they're surprised when one day she stops waiting for them to turn around. I'm not waiting anymore. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, that doesn't feel like loss. It feels like finally taking up the space that was always mine.